All right. Good evening. It is Thursday night. It's week 3. And for those of you who are watching this later, welcome to you. And good to be with you tonight, Carol. Before we get started, I would just want to show you something. I have a lot of, as you can imagine, I have a lot of Bibles. I don't mean to have a lot of Bibles. It just comes with the territory, I guess. And I just wanted to show you this one. And for those of you who are listening to this and can't see it, but I am recording this for you, I picked up a brand new copy called the Cultural Background Study Bible. This is an NIV version, and I absolutely love it. It just came out within the last few weeks or month or so. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it are all it's all of a lot of background content. And the study notes have everything to do with ancient Near Eastern Mediterranean culture, in which it's explaining certain cultural aspects that we may not understand as 21st century American readers of the biblical text. If you've taken the New Testament course, you have the Handbook to the Bible, which is a required textbook for that course, where there a lot of material similar to this in the study Bible, and it includes full picture photographs and all kinds of introductory material, and I've been really impressed with it. So for those of you who might want to pick up a copy or put it on your birthday list or Christmas list, I really want to encourage you to check out the Cultural Background Study Bible. And so, anyway, this week we are going to work through the assignments a little bit, get you going on those, as well as should just give you one, in case you missed it earlier, go through the exegetical paper expectations just a little bit here to get us going, and then we'll jump right into the assignments. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully you can see the main screen. I created this document to help all of you and to guide your writing for this major paper due at the end of week 4. You should have chosen a passage and emailed me already which passage from Ephesians you've chosen. And then here we go. So here's some of the breakdown and what to expect as far as this paper is concerned. As far as the point breakdowns, that's right up here at the top, including form and style. That's just how well your paper is organized, as well as the research, 15 points for including a wide variety of outside and reliable research sources. 15 points just for giving the main idea and the outline of your passage, as well as the outline of Ephesians, which you've already done. You had to do that for this past week, and so you can clean that up, and that will be 15 points right there that you've earned without having to do a whole lot of extra work. And then we're going to get into the context and the background. Now, you've done some of this already too from week 1, when you did some research on the city of Ephesus and its history. And now, and we even talked about the book of Acts in Ephesus, and you were to explore that. So if you didn't spend a lot of time exploring Ephesus in the time of Paul, I want to encourage you to do a little bit more of that, because that's going to provide the context, the foundation for which Paul is writing to this group of believers in Ephesus. And then the bulk of the paper, of course, is the content, and you can structure your paper however you like, in terms of walking through your passage. Yeah, just again, just want you to use full sentence paragraphs with correct punctuation following the standard paper guidelines. And then an application for today is the last part of the paper. So you get to use your interpretive journey skills and and describe, a real world scenario, an application of your passage for today. Um, that's 20 points. The point value is 150 points due at the end of week 4. In title page information is pretty standard. Most of you do this already. Now, just real quickly, kind of go through the main idea or the main components of the paper. Here is an example of how you can uh, organize your main idea and outline on one page. Pretty self-explanatory here. And then be sure to include an introduction to your paper. Tell the guidelines are here. And you may want to wait to write the introduction until after you've written the bulk of your paper, the body of your paper. Sometimes that's a little bit easier, but it's just 1 or 2 paragraphs that should accomplish 2 things. Get the attention of the reader. That's me or anyone else that you will be sharing your paper with down the road, and think about how the message of your passage connects with the needs of the reader, and then also, you may want to introduce the reader to the application at this point. You may want to do that, you may not. But secondly, introduce the main ideas included in the rest of your paper. Context is 1 to 2 pages, and so you describe the historical cultural situation of Paul and the biblical audience, as well as describe how your passage fits into the overall flow of the entire book of Ephesians. This was a discussion question from last week. When you outlined the book of Ephesians, you were also to discuss how your passage fit in to the overall outline and message of Ephesians. So you should be able to pull, a great deal of content from that discussion question, and if necessary, expand on your writing. And then here I give you some guidelines for writing about the content of your paper. Anywhere from 3 to 4 pages is the body of your paper. This is in addition to the context. So overall, the context and the content of your paper will be 4 to 6 pages. So if you write, if your context is a little bit shorter, but your content is a little bit longer, you get the idea. It evens out. As you're writing the body of your paper, good writing is being able to expand on your own learning. The main thing that you're after is the meaning of the text, but I want to hear your voice in your writing, and then you can use outside sources to support your work, but don't rely too heavily on those outside sources to make your point. Sometimes we can get into this habit of stringing quotes together from outside sources, and we weave them together into full sentences and pages, and that's not what we're looking for here. You can use outside support, and I want you to do that, but I want you to tell me what you're learning as you're writing, and explain your thoughts, and then use those outside sources to support your work rather than the other way around. You can use word studies, consult outside sources and good commentaries. You may want to identify the theological principle communicated in your passage. And so you could choose to, like I said, you have a lot of flexibility in how you actually write your paper, but these are just some ideas to help you pull this information together. One of the things you want to, or a few things you should want to avoid before submitting the paper. The one thing is like preaching to the reader. Like, it's tough, and I think I don't know how to explain this fully, other than just to say, you're writing a paper, you're writing a, 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 a research-based paper. It's not necessarily a sermon. And so don't lose sight then that the goal of the paper is to explain the meaning of the text and how to apply it for today. Avoid using long quotations. Avoid also putting this paper off until the last minute. Here's an interesting point. This is really a great point for us to mention here. Don't avoid or don't ignore the debate. Biblical scholarship is it's a field of study and inquiry, and there's a lot of debate that takes place about the certain meanings of biblical passages or how they apply for today. And if you come across a debate in your research, or you're seeing some really heavy dissenting opinions, engage in that debate. Join the debate. Explain the options to the reader, and if one of the options has your support, then declare it. Say, this is where I fall on this debate, and here's why. That's a great way to engage the reader on issues that are being debated between scholars. And so don't be afraid of the debate. Put it out there, and then make your case for where you fall if you happen to have a contentious passage. We have the book of Ephesians. It's generally not too contentious, but you never know. And then finally, one-page application where, just looking to bring it together, all of your observations, your interpretation, the meaning of the text, and then in learning to apply it today. And then the bibliography is at the end. So anyway, those are just some general thoughts and expectations for you as you go into writing this paper. And I think so far I haven't had any, and no one has said anything to me about not being able to access this or see it. They're just want to make sure everybody sees it again, just in case. So this is me just over communicating with all of you. All right, let us go to this week's assignments then. Pull this up. And I'm actually going to start. I'm going to start with the Revelation assignment. Assignment number 17-2. All right, so one of the things that you're being exposed to in this class, if you haven't already been exposed to it, is this idea. It's not really an idea, but the concept of genre. It's easier, I think, to think of genre when we think of music, because music is universal. And genre then is a type or a category of music when we're talking about genres of music like classical or rock or country or rap or soul or praise music. Those are all different genres. And the Bible is really a collection of books. That's the Latin word, I believe, is bibliotheca, which means collection of books. And that's where we get our word Bible today. And it's a collection of 66 books written by over 40 or so authors, spanning a period of time of roughly 1,500 years, all bound together into what we call the Bible, containing both the Old and New Testaments. And so the Bible then really is a collection of, like I said, books, but each book can differ in its genre. And so Revelation is a certain type of genre. Just as Paul's letters, they are letters. So that's a different genre. Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Gospel writing is a type of ancient biography. And you've encountered this in your reading. And that's another genre. Wisdom literature like Job and Proverbs. That is yet another type of genre, as well as historical writing. You think of maybe First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings. The Book of Acts is a historical documentation. Because it's not like a gospel, it's not like wisdom writing or any of the others, and it's not a letter necessarily, though it was addressed to a particular person. And then even poetry. The Bible contains so much poetry, and so that is also another type of genre. And so Revelation is apocalyptic literature. That's the genre of Revelation, just very similar to Daniel. It was a specific type of writing. And so you see, like, as we're engaged over the last couple of weeks in interpreting passages from the book of Acts. Now we are going to look tonight at Gospels as well as Revelation. You can see that we're going to approach these texts a little differently. The major principles apply, but it's really important for us to understand what we're reading, and that not all of the Bible is the same type of genre, because it's a collection, right? It's a collection of letters and books and historical documents that have been put together, but they all contain different types of literature. And so Revelation is a different type of literature. And here in this assignment, we are going to look at each one of the churches that is written, that Jesus sends a message to an angel, and the angel communicates this message to the Apostle John, who then writes these words down. And so what we're going to do, and this is, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's really quite, it's a simple exercise of fill in the blank, and you can create your own chart, or you can write it out in paragraph form. But you're going to look at each one of the churches and fill in the blanks. Give me the words that fit the command, where it talks about Jesus, what the praise is, what's the complaint against the church, what is the warning that they need to heed, and then finally, what is the promise? If they heed the warning, what is the promise? And so a couple of things to keep in mind as you do this. It's not always clear which verse falls into which specific box, and that's okay. And there may be some instances where you can't fill in a box because there's no praise, or there is no complaint, but there's a double warning. It's not exactly going to be that you'll be able to fill every box, though you most likely will. But don't be surprised by that. And then lastly, I want you to do this for your church. So I want you to write a short letter to the angel of the church in Topeka, Kansas, or to your specific church name, and really, think about your church as you write, and what do you think that Jesus would say to your church, and so go and write that out, fill in these boxes. And it's always fascinating to me when students do this exercise, because some really, like, it's the time to kind of look at your church through a critical eye, but yet understand that Jesus also praises these churches, but he praises them and warns them, and then says, hey, but if you heed my warning, there is a promise for you in the end. And so do this for your church. It'll be an interesting and challenging exercise. And I'm curious to see what you have to say about that. So let's just look at this really quick. We're going to look at Ephesus in chapter 2 of Revelation, verse 1. And so we're looking for the command, what it says, what the biblical text says about Jesus, the praise, the complaint, as well as the exhortation or warning and the final promise. And so let me get my text tools up here so I can type. All right. So chapter 2, verse 1, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write. Okay, so this is the command coming up. So write this. These are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know, he goes on to say, I know your deeds, your hard work, and your perseverance. I know that you cannot tolerate wicked people, that you have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and have found them to be false. So right away, the first thing I notice is that Jesus is described as, let's see if I can get this here. These are the words of him. Jesus is the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Okay, so that'll fit right there in that box. The command, we're just going to put this, to the angel of the church in Ephesus, right? To angel. Okay. To the angel of the church in Ephesus, right? All right, so the praise, what is the praise? The praise is in the next verse where Jesus says, I know your deeds, right? I know your deeds. And I'm just going to paraphrase this, and your hard work and your perseverance. Okay, so that's the praise. And the complaint, it goes on to praise him. I know that you cannot tolerate wicked people, so that's a part of the praise, and you have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and found them false. Okay, so he goes on to praise him through verse 3. You have persevered and have endured hardships for my name and have not grown weary. Boom. Okay, so yet I hold this against you. Okay, here's the complaint. All right, you have forsaken your first love, ... And so I'm going to add the rest of that. If I were working on this assignment, you have forsaken your first love, you had it first. And then he says, consider. So here, right? Consider how far you have fallen. This is the warning, right? Consider how far you have fallen. So consider ... how far you have fallen. If you repent and do the things you did at first. So repent and do. And I'm just going to paraphrase that. You can fill in the blanks as you do this exercise. And if you do not repent, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place. All right. But you do have this in your favor. You hate the practice of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Okay, so that's another praise, right? You could add that back to the praise if you would like. I'm not going to hold it against you if you don't, but that's a praise. Jesus says you have this in your favor. So then the promise comes at the very end. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying, right, to the churches. And to the one who is victorious. So here we go. To the one who is victorious. ... And I would fill in the rest of the blank saying, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Done. Done with Ephesus. And then go on to Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, and so on. All right. So it's pretty much fill in the blanks. You just kind of have to follow along and discern which verses fit in which boxes. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
All right. Good. Pretty straightforward there. Let's take a look at assignment 15-1. And it says this. It says, apply the two interpretive questions we used to read the Gospels to Matthew 24 through 25, verse 13, or to another section of the Gospel selected by your teacher, which I am not selecting another passage, and then record your findings in the chart below. Okay, so what is this workbook? What is the workbook assignment pointing us to? It's pointing us back to the textbook, and in pages 273 and let's see, our pages 273, 274, 275, and all the way through 282. So 272 to 282. But the two questions that we want to keep in mind, the first one is right, and then both of them are on page 273, is what does the small story say about Jesus? And second, what is the gospel writer trying to say to his readers by the way that he puts the smaller stories together? So what is the writer saying by putting the stories together? It's just a real brief summary. There we go. Of those two questions. And so here we see, and we're gonna read these three passages from Matthew 24 and 25. And here you're just going to record your findings. So you can do this through a Word document. You can create separate columns if you want, or you can do it in paragraph form. It's your choice. But address these two questions so you have three smaller stories, 1, 2, 3. And then what is the writer saying by putting these stories together? And you'll see down here at the bottom of the page, there is a larger box, and that's where this second question comes into play is, what is the writer communicating to the reader by putting stories together? Right here. And then we'll put that in that box there. Okay, so Matthew 24. I got to get my Bible open to Matthew 24. We have 40 for two verses here. Matthew 24, verses 43 and 44. All right. Jesus says, "But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him to." Okay, so I can record, or I can write my findings in here based on this first question. What does the small story say about Jesus? So what does this little story say about Jesus? And Jesus is speaking here, right? So Jesus is speaking and he's teaching his disciples about some end of times kind of things, including the destruction of the temple and other signs that they need to be looking for when this happens. And we see, like in verse 42, he's telling them to keep watch, to be diligent, because you do not know on what day the Lord will come. And then this is the passage that we have here. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch. There's that word, kept watch, again. He kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. And so you must also be ready. So Jesus is right. Jesus is speaking to the disciples about. I need to. He's speaking to them and saying, "Be ready." He's the keep watch. He says it twice in a matter of a couple of verses. So you also must be ready. It's about being ready for what? For the coming of the Son of Man. Because, and you can keep going, you can write as much as you possibly can about this, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. So I'm going to say at an unexpected time. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then I'm going to flip the page or continue on here. And Jesus goes on to tell, to emphasize his point yet again. And he says in verse 45 of the same chapter, "Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants of his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns." So Jesus is saying to the disciples, Jesus saying that he's the master, right? This is kind of his way of saying that. He's referring to himself in the third person. Oops, having problems here. Jesus is saying, he is the master, and the master's put servant has put in charge of the servant. So who is the faithful and wise servant who gives the servants in his household their food at their proper time? So while the master is away, Jesus says the servant continues to take care of the household, continues to take care of the business. Life isn't going to stop just because the master has gone away for a while. And so he says a faithful and wise servant continues to do what the servant is supposed to do. All right. So you can write that in any way that you like, it will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away from a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. Okay, so now he's switched. No longer we're talking about the wise and faithful servant. Now we're talking about an evil, wicked servant. What's going to happen? Well, the master of the servant will come on a day when he doesn't expect. And so we've heard that before. We heard about just a few verses previous. So, um, and and so then we have this bit here again that the master will come on a day when the servant does not expect it. Okay, the servant doesn't know. And of course, he's evil, he's wicked, he's not doing the business of the master's work, so he will what? He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, okay? This is like a horrible position to be in if you do not continue to carry on the master's business, all right? So that's the two. There's two passages there. Now we've got one more to do, and it is related to these two. And so let's bring my text up here. And the parable of the 10 virgins begins this way. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming. There it is again, right? There's this delay. There's this unexpected hour when the bridegroom is coming. But this particular case, the bridegroom is a bit delayed. And so it says that they all became drowsy and they fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out. No, they replied, there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourself. But while they were on their way to go buy oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. Lord, Lord, they said, open the door for us. But he replied, truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. There it is again, right? So we're seeing this repetitive theme of, in this case, this is a parable that is about a bridegroom and 10 virgins, which is it's a historical cultural weddings in this day and age often were week-long celebrations, like we think our weddings of today here in our society of being expensive and elaborate, or they can be. Imagine having a 7-day wedding where you invited the whole community. So if you lived in a village or a town of a couple hundred, you better believe everyone was expected to receive an invitation to come to your party and celebrate the day, the wedding day. And it didn't last just for a few hours or even a day. It lasted 7 days. And in this case, there's, the evening of the wedding, the bride and the bridesmaids, they're together and they're waiting for the groom to come with the groomsmen, you could say, to escort them to the bridegroom's home, which is where typically a wedding ceremony would take place and the party would begin. But the exact timing was unpredictable, given given the many preparations that were required. And so this particular groom was delayed in coming, but um, what we do know about the historical contextual setting here is that a groom would normally come after dark to escort the bride to the wedding, and so um, they had lamps, and there's this theme of preparation again. Some half of the bridesmaid, half of the virgins, half of the bridesmaids had lamps and extra oil to burn through the night in anticipation of the bridegroom coming. Half of them did not. And so by the time they heard the wedding bells ringing, declaring that the bridegroom was making his way toward the bride, half of them don't realize they don't have enough oil to 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 greet the bridegroom at night and journey with him back to the wedding banquet. And so they run off to go buy some more. But of course, by the time they get to the wedding banquet, the doors had been shut and they are locked out. And and so Jesus wraps up the parable by saying, "Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." So, there, let me. I'm just going to write that last verse down for now. But you again write down as much as you can that is relevant to this assignment. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. All right. Okay, so those are the three small stories, and we want to be able to talk. We want to talk about Jesus as well. So in Matthew 24:43, Jesus talks about himself as being the Son of Man. In 24:45 through 51, Jesus is saying that he is the master of a household. And then also we see here Matthew 25 in this parable that Jesus is the bridegroom and he is coming for his bride. So taking these three stories into account, what is the writer communicating to the reader by putting these stories together? Would you like to take a stab at this, Carol? What is the writer suggesting to the reader by putting these stories back to back to back?
Looks to me like the illustration is that we need to be prepared for Christ's return because we don't know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen.
Right. Correct. Yep. Exactly. Because the day and hour are unknown. And what's interesting too is that, you really do a close examination, you'd see that sitting around and waiting isn't an option.
Right.
Did you notice that? It's not there's really not a hint of it's okay. It's okay to wait this out. Hunker down and wait this out. The day of the Lord is coming. No, what Jesus makes clear is that there's still work to be done. A wise and faithful servant continues to do the master's work and run the master's household while he's away. It's the wicked and foolish servant who doesn't. That's also just something that continually leaps out at me as I look these verses over. It's just fascinating to me. So, so yeah, good. Yeah, it's just as simple as that. What is the writer communicating by putting these stories together? That the reader must be prepared for Christ's return, because the day and the hour are unknown. And you can elaborate on that as much as you like, or as little. This is, like I said, this assignment is much simpler than the ones that we have done in the previous week. So, any questions about that at all?
I believe I've got it.
Good. All right. Now, we're going to go over to Luke, and it says for this assignment to interpret the parable of the great banquet in Luke 14, or the parable of the unjust judge and the persistent widow in Luke 18. So you have a decision to make here. And to use the interpretive principles explained in chapter 15 in the section dealing with parables. And so that's what I was talking about on pages 273, or excuse me, 274 through 282. And ask the questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. You can take special note of repetitions. And let me tell you, don't underestimate the power of a repetition in a passage. There is a lot of meaning contained when we see a word or a phrase being repeated over and over and over again. Sometime read, just if you have time, read Nehemiah chapter 1. Read Nehemiah chapter 1 sometime and underline every time you see the word servant. It's unbelievable. And so there's meaning in the repetition. And it could be as simple as one word, like the word servant in Nehemiah 1, or it could be a phrase that's repeated a couple of times. And so identify those repetitions that you see. And this is all outlined in the textbook on pages 276. And I'm just going to jot this down for those who may be watching this later to use. The textbook is your guide as much as necessary. Pages 275 through 280, 283, 282. So consult those pages as necessary. So let's look at a passage here. Do you have one? Do you have a preference as to which one we take on here, Carol? I'll let you pick.
Luke 14, 15
Okay.
is good for me.
Okay. So Luke 14, parable of the great banquet, you're going to see here. So if I'm working through the interpretive principles in here, I'm going to be paying attention to the who, the what, what's the storyline here? When is this taking place? Where is it taking place? Who is involved in the story? Why is this happening? So that's one of the main reasons, the big idea or the theological principle that the writer, in this case it's Luke, is trying to communicate with the reader and the audience, as well as you can include the word how, and so that's the means of which this. What is the means? So the textbook gives some good examples of when Jesus is in the boat crossing the storm. They're in a storm and in a boat together crossing the sea, and we see here like the disciples. When we're talking about how is the action taking place in the story, the disciples use a question to rebuke Jesus, but Jesus rebukes the storm with a spoken word. Jesus uses questions to rebuke the disciples. So like what's the means of the ongoing action or conversation in the story? And so let's do this. Let's do the who, what, when, where, why, and how, taking note of any special repetitions that we read in the story. And finally, let me see if there's anything else here that we need to catch. But I think that pretty much covers it. Okay, so Luke 14. starts off in verse 15 this way. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." And so we have to stop right there, because we're being set up. In order to know where Jesus is and who he is with, we need to back up considerably in this story and probably engage Luke all the way from the beginning of the chapter at verse 1. So here we see in verse 1, on Sabbath. So it was a Sabbath day. So when is this taking place? It's taking place on a Sabbath day. And Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. Okay, so we know then Jesus is involved in the story. We know that there's a prominent Pharisee involved, and he's going in like, what is he doing? Jesus was invited to dinner. And so in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. So here's another character involved in the story. A man who is suffering from a disease. And Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts of the law. So experts of the law and Pharisees are also present in front of this man. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Okay, so Jesus asks them a question. This is a how statement. So when we're talking about the how, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, this is a how. Jesus asks a question to the Pharisees: is it lawful to heal? So he's asking them a theological question. He wants to know what do they understand regarding what is their understanding, interpretation of how to apply the Sabbath. And they remained silent. So they said nothing in response. So taking hold of him, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, so Jesus is talking again, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls in a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And of course the answer is yes, they will. But they said nothing. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. So Jesus is now in the home, and he's observing. He's sitting back, and he's looking at where people are sitting, because in his culture there were prominent places. There were best seats. Where are the good? When we go to events and we do things, we want the best seats in the house, right? We can relate to this. And so Jesus is watching who's taking the best seats in the places of prominence around him. And of course, we believe that Jesus deserves the most prominent seat, but everyone else, as we imagine ourselves in the story, they imagine that they deserve the more prominent seats, because they don't understand who Jesus is. And so he's teaching, which is not uncommon during a gathering like this in Jesus's day. Dinners were not short; they would have been longer. And of course, if there were rabbis or prominent people from the community coming, they may do some teaching as well. And so Jesus says, imagine. Write this: when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for the person more distinguished than you may have been invited. And so he goes on to talk about instead take the lowest seat when you're invited to a wedding feast, so that the host of the home will say, no, please come sit at a higher seat. So that you're not humiliated. And then he goes on to say in verse 11, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And I think, if I were writing this assignment out, I would include that as a part of the why. Why is Jesus going to all this trouble to tell this story? Well, he makes his point pretty clear, or Luke says that this is what Jesus says. He says, for everyone who exalts themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. And so he's making a point by including that statement there. And then he goes on to say, Jesus says, when you give a dinner, don't invite your friends or brothers or sisters or relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And um, so then he gives this. Now we're back to where we started finally. And someone who heard Jesus teaching says, right on, Jesus. You I totally agree with you. Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. Now, this may be, and this is where my new Bible has been very, very helpful. This may be a cross reference. This person may be referencing Isaiah chapter 25, which talks about a heavenly banquet. A feast where God is hosting this, where the Lord is hosting this feast, and many all have been invited to come and partake. Where the food never stops coming, where the wine doesn't stop flowing, and there is joy in the presence of the Lord in the context of this banquet. And so that may be what this gentleman is acknowledging when he says, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." And then Jesus goes on to teach again. He says, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent out a servant who had been um, to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready. And then we see in the rest of the parable people making excuses as to why they cannot come. These are pretty lame excuses, because for example, who buys a field without seeing it first, or who buys 5 yoke of oxen without trying them out first. And still someone says, I just got married, I can't come, which is really interesting, because we just talked about just a few minutes ago how wedding celebrations were 7 days long. And so this was this not on your radar when you were first invited to the banquet? This was some sort of scheduling conflict here that could have easily been avoided. um, and so the servant came back and reported to his master that everyone was too busy, and he became angry, and he sent him back. He sent the servant back out into the streets to get anyone and everyone he could find, including the poor and the crippled, the blind and the lame. And he says, this is fascinating. In verse 22, servant said, Sir, what you ordered has been done, and there is still room. I love that. I love that image of this party happening that the Lord is throwing, and he's inviting anyone and everyone to come. And so the messenger goes out and brings in a bunch of people, only to find out like there's still more room. It's just an unbelievable image. Um, and so the master tells his servants to go back out and to bring more people in, compel them to come in, he says, so that my house will be full. Just an incredible image there. So who are the characters in this story? We've already mentioned a few of those. What is the storyline? So work through the storyline of this parable. And when is it taking place? We already talked about the Sabbath day in the context of a dinner at a prominent Pharisee's house. And this is on the it's on the heels of Jesus coming to Jerusalem. And so where is it taking place? We already mentioned that. Why is it taking place? So this is going to be, what's the reason for including this parable? And then also finally the means. And we talked about this, that Jesus is bringing up questions in the context of this conversation. He's asking he's asking a question concerning healing on the Sabbath and what is appropriate, and then engages them in a parable to prove a point. Right in verse 11, that those who humble themselves will be exalted. but those who exalt themselves will be humbled. So that's that's a brief overview of this assignment. But I think you get the idea. You just have to work through the questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how, and look for anything that's repeated in the story, um, and take note of that. And then and then give your interpretation of what you've read. Um, so we've got the basic questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how, and then what's your interpretation. Okay. Any questions about that at all, Carol? I kind of flew through it quickly, but I want to be sensitive to our time here, and address any questions you might have. Good.
Yeah, I'm good, I think.
Good. Real good. Any lingering questions before we sign off tonight?
I don't believe so. You covered it pretty well, I believe.
Okay, wonderful. Glad to hear it. Hey, thanks for your time. Appreciate you logging in and bearing with me for the last hour and a few minutes. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great week.
You do the same. Thank you.
You bet. Have a wonderful night. Take care.
You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.